the personification of God on earth, and the African woman looked at herself as the personification of Goddess on earth. And in fact, when we see the creator deity known as Ptah, Ptah is standing on a rectangular form. This rectangular form is a plinth. It was known as Ma'at, and this was a sturdy base for which the deities and the kings used to set their throne on. Ma'at was the primary quality of the firm foundation. So in essence, the whole Kemetic society was based on an African woman known as Ma'at. And she was shown with her wings widespread and the ostrich feather on her head. She was the symbol of cosmic harmony, and she gave balance and order to all things. And she represented the unwavering path of the order of the world. And this was exemplified by the stiffness of the ostrich feather on her head. It was affected by, but unaltered by, the winds of change. So brothers and sisters, when we were in Abdu yesterday at the temple of Seti I, we see Seti I offering Ma'at to Amun-Ra. And this is in order to ensure equilibrium would prevail in Kemet. And Ma'at represented truth, justice, and righteousness. In fact, she gives the best representation of the significance of African women in ancient Kemet. Without the African woman, social stability would be forgotten. But not only was the African woman looked at as the foundation for Kemetic society, the African man looked at the African woman as the heavens. And she was embodied in the figure of Nut, who you see on many of the ceilings of the temples. Nut was said to give birth to the sun, Ra, every day, and then swallow him at night. So out of the union of heaven and earth, Nut and Geb, came Asar and Aset, because our ancestors did not think that there was some white male, blue-eyed, blonde-haired God sitting up in heaven all by himself. Our ancestors felt that the deity ought to have a spouse, and they each had their own responsibilities. So here you see Asar, and he's sitting on the throne because he's in the spiritual realm. Behind him is his wife, Aset. She wears the throne on her head because, sisters, in order for him to rule, he had to come through her to sit on the throne. That shows the balance between the African male and the African female. He was her executor or agent, and she was the power behind the throne. Now, Aset had many names. She was considered to be mistress of the throne, the divine one, the queen of all the Neteru, queen of the south and north, lady of the great house, and even the green goddess. And as the green goddess, she was known as Mut-Netchet. And what is Mut-Netchet? None other than Mother Nature. And so you always see her with the throne on top of her head. We'll go to her temple in a few days, and that is the temple of Aset at Philae. And when we see it, we're just going to be looking at the skeletal remains of that temple. And we can just imagine how beautiful it might have looked in its heyday. But Aset was the one who possessed the words of power, and that brought Asar back to life, because what she said was delivered in such a certain tone, rate, and deliverance that none could resist her command. So therefore, Aset was associated with Seshat. Now, Seshat, we said, was the female scribe and historian. And this indicates that recording and vocalization of words were feminine functions. So even back in the day, brothers thought that sisters could really talk. And Seshat, we said, was the one who invented writing, while Tahuti was her counterpart, and Tahuti taught writing to the world. And you always see Seshat with her pen because she's going to record the deeds of the king. Scribes were called Sesh. They were named after Seshat. And here you have Amenhotep, son of Hapu. He was called a Sesh, named after Seshat. Her headpiece, this seven-pointed star was called the Sefek Ubi. It means she who wears the two horns. And so her headdress was also her symbol in Meru Neter. And it was considered to be a magic wand. And the star was the symbol which represented the source of all creative ideas. So that was where Europeans got the idea of the fairy godmother with her wand. That came from the seven-pointed headpiece on the star of Seshat. So in Abdu, when we were there at the temple, part of it was even dedicated to Seshat. And we see her here with Ramesu. Seshat, as Ashra mentioned yesterday or the day before, was mistress of the House of Architects. So she helped to lay the foundation for the temples. And our Seshat, because of her recording and vocalization and because of the writing of the deeds, that's why we gave Sister Ife the name Seshat, because the sister's looking over the scroll and trying to decide if the words that I wrote about her were correct. So she's definitely a Seshat. Nebhet was called in the pyramid text Seshat, foremost of builders, and she was known as mistress of the house. Her sister was Aset, who we just saw earlier with the throne on her head. Now Aset was married to the good brother Asar, while Nebhet was married to the bad brother Set. And Nebhet was known as the deity of silence and patience. She was associated with death, weeping, and sorrow, but she also protected mothers at childbirth. Then we had the protective deities, Wajet and Nekhbet. And you can see them on the brow of the king when you saw the gold mask of King Tutankhamun. And it was through the strength of the Netert, or the African goddess, on his brow that the king could rule over his people, because she was the one who inspired fear of him. And she made sure that Kemet was in power and the universe was in order. Without the Uraeus and the vulture, in other words, without the African woman, the king was powerless. Ashra mentioned to me yesterday that many of you that went to the temple yesterday were asking about this particular piece. And it's not only just a piece of jewelry or a necklace. It was called a minat, but it was also a musical instrument. And it was offered to the king in order to compel all lands to serve the king by means of his attraction and his terrorizing qualities. So that was the minat. And usually it's associated with the deity Heteru. We spoke earlier about the lotus, the Seshin, and this was used by the priestesses because the lotus had a variety of qualities. It was said to have regenerative qualities. Ra, in fact, was said to emerge from the lotus. And that was because of the center part of the lotus looked very much like the sun. So therefore, you see on not only on the jewelry, but on the temples, you'll also see the lotus symbol as well as on the sarcophagus. So that's why when we had our ceremony, when our sisters came forth as part of the initiation, we used the lotus. It actually goes back to the tomb of Raqmara. You can see it over 3,000 years ago, to the 18th dynastic period. And we see our sisters offering the wesket or collar as well as the lotus. And our sisters are down here, those who are going to be initiated, they're kneeling, one knee down, one knee up, just like our sister Seshat is doing. So we reenacted an ancient African ceremony when we were there at the Temple of Waset. And once our sisters sniffed the Seishin, then they receive the regenerative qualities, just like our sisters in ancient times are sniffing the Seishin. They're then awarded with the wesket or collar, like our sister Anuket is right here. So brothers and sisters, for those of you who get spooky about things, all we were doing was reenacting a sacred African ceremony.